and thank you for joining us on this short webinar where Dr. Rocker will be pointing out the 5 most common mistakes that practitioners make when choosing a microscope for live blood analysis. So please feel free to post your questions. If you have any questions, in the questions box there on your GoToWebinar panel. Hello, Dr. Rocker. Thank you very much for joining us today. Could you please tell us the 5 most common mistakes that practitioners make when choosing a microscope for live blood analysis?
All right, absolutely, yes, thank you very much, Elizabeth. Well, there are 5 very common mistakes that we tend to encounter with practitioners signing up for the course and getting set up with a microscope. So we've put together a few points to just help attendees to avoid these mistakes. So firstly, first point there is to actually take advice and look for advice on what is required in a dark field microscope from the experts in the field. So in other words, if you are looking at getting set up with the microscope for live blood analysis, then look at what the people that are sort of experts in the field in live blood analysis are using and what they recommend. So, the information on what's required in a dark field microscope is based on work that's been done over many years by the pioneers in dark field microscopy, and they've worked out over the years what combination of features is really ideal for a dark field microscope. And those features are actually quite important. If any of those features are compromised on, you end up losing visibility and you stop seeing some of the very important components and elements that you should be able to see in a dark field blood sample. So then the second point is touches on the same principle, is that it's important not to just take claims made by microscope suppliers and manufacturers at face value. So this has especially become more of an issue recently, with online shopping, and there are a very high number of microscopes being sold online as dark field microscopes, and many of them actually are sold as live blood analysis dark field microscopes, but they do not fulfill all the necessary requirements, for these microscopes to actually work properly in dark field. And this is not because of microscope suppliers deliberately misleading people, but just purely because they are not involved in the field of live blood analysis. They simply don't know what specifications or features are required. And manufacturers or microscope suppliers simply assume that any dark field microscope would be suitable, which absolutely is not the case. Right, and then thirdly, it's also not advisable to try and upgrade a basic microscope to a dark field system. We have seen some videos and suggestions by people out there on how to create your own dark field condenser and how to create a dark field microscope with a basic bright field microscope. And unfortunately, there really is no loophole that can be exploited. It really isn't possible to upgrade a basic microscope to a proper dark field system, and it really isn't just simply because of the build quality or the optics, but mostly in the first place it relates to the light source. If the light source is not bright enough, it's not going to be suitable for dark field microscopy, and it's also not really possible to replace a light bulb, weak light bulb with a stronger one. And we've seen that previously where practitioners try to upgrade a 20-watt halogen system by inserting a stronger light bulb, which causes problems. And unfortunately, there are no LED light bulbs that can simply be replaced and used in a halogen system that produce enough brightness for dark field. So there really is no sort of simple way to upgrade it. Perhaps if you have some electrical engineering knowledge and you're able to sort of build something, then you may be able to get the components and source the components and actually put it together. But it is quite a specialized system. Our darkfield systems use a 9-watt LED light source that produces a brightness equivalent to 100-watt halogen. So really quite bright, and yeah, quite a specialized system. Right, and then the fourth point, it is also advisable to get set up with a proper darkfield system before starting a practice. So some attendees, because of the cost of a proper darkfield system, feel that they would rather build up a practice with a basic microscope just to get started, and then once the practice is busy enough, it would justify the expense of a professional system. Unfortunately, this doesn't really work, because if your microscope isn't really suitable for darkfield microscopy, then you won't really be able to build up a live blood analysis practice, because technically you wouldn't really be doing live blood analysis properly. And we do see that in practice as well. People really struggle to get the results that you should be getting from live blood analysis if you don't have the the right type of microscope from the start. And then the last point is just actually a suggestion that we usually, when there's any question about the suitability of a microscope for darkfield, we simply recommend that the supplier should supply an image of live blood in darkfield from the specific microscope. And this can then be compared to the images in our course materials, or attendees can even send those images to us for comparison. And from the image, you'll be able to see very clearly whether the system is actually suitable for live blood microscopy or not. If it's also sold as a darkfield live blood analysis microscope, and and the image does not really compare well with what we're expecting to see in live blood samples, then of course that shows that the system is not suitable. And also if you actually get an image that does look suitable, and the microscope then, when you receive it, doesn't actually produce that image, then also as a buyer you at least have some recourse, which is not the case at all if you simply buy a microscope in good faith. Are there any perhaps any questions, Elizabeth? We have some images to look at as well, just a few examples of what we can see in live blood samples in darkfield and what you should be able to see, and then also what you can get from a microscope that's not really suitable for darkfield microscopy.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's very interesting. And I suppose that practitioners that are interested in buying a microscope for live blood analysis don't really have a background in microscopy, because of the amount of information that they typically need to work through to understand what is needed in a live blood analysis microscope. Many people end up buying a microscope that actually isn't suitable. And that's the problem.
Yeah, it's a huge pitfall, and we've seen it many times as well. And the costs of these other microscopes are is a fraction of what the professional systems go for. So it really is quite tempting, but unfortunately once you have a microscope like that, and it's not suitable for what you're trying to use it for, it's quite difficult to work with something like that. And then one would have to decide if you're going to keep it and compromise some of the results that you might be getting in practice, or if you would try and sell it to someone else.
Absolutely. Okay. We have a question. Betsy is saying, I appreciate your expertise in this matter. Thank you, Betsy. So there are no shortcuts. You have to start with a good microscope if you want to be able to practice live blood analysis with confidence and proficiency. Is that right?
Absolutely, that's 100%. Unfortunately, no no shortcuts. A basic microscope will allow you to practice taking blood samples and looking at them in bright field, but you won't really be able to do any type of dark field microscopy with it. So that's something that you would have to then learn once you actually get a proper dark field system. So it is, for the learning process, it's just much easier to actually get set up with a good system from the beginning.
Okay, Betsy's saying, I'm planning to wait until I finish the class and determine my plans for going forward as a health coach before I purchase the microscope. Is this not recommended?
Well, we do have attendees that do that as well, and quite a few of our attendees actually go that route. So that's completely fine. There's also enough time given to attendees to complete the training, even if they don't have a microscope. At the beginning of the course, we provide enough time for them to complete. To complete the course, you would of course need a microscope, because you would have to have access to a microscope to to do the case study. But we do provide additional time for attendees to do that as well.
Okay, thank you. And Nikati is saying, I have a phase contrast microscope. Will it be okay?
Yeah, it will allow you to see some of the anomalies that are visible in dark field, but not all of the dark field anomalies. Unfortunately, phase contrast does sort of bridge the gap somehow between bright field and dark field, but there are many dark field anomalies that are only visible in a good professional dark field system.
So will you miss some of the pleomorphic forms, for example?
Yes, absolutely. So with a phase contrast system, even things like fibrin, which is fairly common in live blood samples, is not as clearly visible in phase contrast as with a good quality dark field system. So although you'll still be able to see it, but you won't really see it in to the extent that it really is in the case. So it might appear as a low grade finding where it's actually much more advanced.
And can a phase contrast microscope be upgraded?
It really depends on the specifications. One would have to look at the specifications of the microscope, specifically the light source. That would be quite important. The phase contrast systems, similar to dark field, also require a fairly strong light source, but not as strong or as bright as dark field. So some of the phase contrast systems would, for example, have a 30-watt halogen light bulb, whereas a dark field microscope would usually need to have a 50-watt halogen light bulb. So one would need to have a look at the specifications to see.
Okay, so we'll put the email address up in towards the end of the webinar, Nikati. So if you'd like to make a note of the email address and send us the specifications, and we can have a look at that, yes?
Absolutely.
And where can we find your recommended microscopes?
Right, they are on the website, on Live Blood Online. You'll be able to find information on the various options that we have available on the Microscopes page.
Thank you. And I'll be showing you that email address again towards the end of the webinar. Are they made in China?
No, so the microscopes that we supply are actually made for us by a contract manufacturer in Japan. The cameras are from China. We do have the cameras sourced from a specific microscope camera manufacturer in China, but our microscopes are from Japan. Many of the microscopes available online, sort of well-known websites that sell microscopes online, those microscopes would all be from China. And while some of the microscopes from China are quite good quality, and many of the components and microscopes that are actually sold under famous brands, also manufactured in China, when they're not really branded microscopes, there's always a lot of variation in terms of the quality. So you'd often end up getting a microscope that really has a very, very poor build quality and is not really reliable.
Thank you. And do you offer any discounts to attendees on your training course?
So the attendees that are enrolled in the training course, we do have free shipping that we include in the, with the microscopes.
And we have an entry-level microscope?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So we have an entry-level microscope as well that's specifically for our training course attendees. So that's not on the website, but we do send information out to attendees on that as well.
So if you want to know more about that, then please drop us an email at the email address that we'll show you at the end. So what makes that entry level, and can it be upgraded in the future?
Yes, it can be upgraded. So the entry level we've basically put together as a as an entry level system. So as a microscope that provides all the necessary and essential specifications to allow you to do dark field properly without compromising on any of the important specifications, but some of the extras have been taken off and can be added later on. So, for example, there's 2 objectives that are emitted with the entry-level system, but the microscope has space for the 2 additional objectives to be added later on. And it's supplied with a basic standard definition camera, which can also be upgraded. So yeah, it can be upgraded and changed as you go along, but from the beginning, it will allow you to see everything that you should be able to see in a dark field live blood sample.
Marvelous, thank you. That was very interesting. So please continue.
All right, fantastic. So just some interesting images that we can look at of some samples in dark field. And just to illustrate really what we should be able to see. So this is a dark field sample, looking at red blood cells there. So red blood cells would be visible with any type of dark field system, but that's also what is visible in bright field. And the benefit of dark field is really in allowing us to see things that are not visible in bright field. So for example, when we look at this white blood cell here, these fine faint lines coming off the white blood cell, this is actually a pleomorphism pattern, a pleomorphic parasitic pattern, showing a parasitized white blood cell here. Quite an important thing to be able to see. It indicates stress on the immune system and something that would need to be addressed. And if it's missed, looking at the rest of the sample, if you're simply seeing bright field anomalies, you might assume that everything is completely fine in this case, where the white blood cell parasitism shows a fairly advanced stage of pleomorphic parasitism, which is it's usually in cases where the terrain really needs a lot of attention. All right, so also a live sample here in dark field, and a fairly common finding here, these lines, faint white lines seen here, really concentrated at the center of the image here, but we can also see them extending out really throughout the plasma here, and you can see that some of these strands are really quite faint. So with a basic system that doesn't have the required specifications and the required sort of high degree of contrast that we need in dark field, you won't be able to see these lines at all. These are not really visible in bright field either. So in a phase contrast system, you might be able to see some of these lines here, but it won't be nearly as extensive as what we're able to see here in dark field. All right, so also a few interesting pleomorphic patterns going on here. We have a few ghost cells as well, and some thesits or thacits in between, fermentation patterns basically seen in darkfield, and then these faint lines again towards the lower left-hand side of the image. So fibrin, these are fairly common patterns, that we encounter in practice, but really quite important. And if one misses them, then you don't really end up going in the right direction with the case in terms of treatment. Right, and just another example of some pleomorphic patterns here. And what's quite interesting at the bottom of the image here, this white blood cell looks like a monocyte, and we have some of these extensions from the white blood cell as well. So also some white blood cell parasitism. This tube-like structure towards the center of the image is actually an acid. Acids we are going to be covering in the course, and there's also a longer acid visible towards the top of the image here as well. So acids we will be looking at, but these are very advanced growth forms in pleomorphism, indicating chronic imbalance of the terrain and chronic high levels of acidity. And the value with pleomorphism in your analysis also is that we're often able to see these patterns that point to more long-term chronic and potentially degenerative things, where your bright field anomalies might not indicate anything potentially degenerative. So really important if you really want to understand properly what's going on in a case.
And what are ghost cells?
Let's go back to that image there. Ghost cells are actually, and it's not, well, there's one here, is just a red blood cell that's really quite faint. So we can see the example just adjacent to these thrombocytes here. And it's just red blood cells where the contents have actually leaked out, also called hemolysis cells or lysis, usually related to things like vitamin B12 deficiency and problems with the actual cell membrane.
So you wouldn't be able to see any of these anomalies in just bright field?
No, well, bright field will show you the ghost cells, but your pleomorphic anomalies and being able to see clearly what's going on with white blood cells, fibrin, and many of the other anomalies that we actually encounter in the plasma is not visible in bright field.
Okay, thank you.
All right, fantastic. So what we often see with these non-live blood analysis dark field systems is that you're really just seeing a bright field image or bright field anomalies, but in dark field. So it doesn't really allow you to see any of the actual dark field anomalies that you should be able to see. It's just purely a darker image. So we are able to see a few target cells here, but the magnification we can see is actually quite low, and the contrast is also very, very low. So compare this to what we should actually get with a proper dark field microscope system. It's a similar type of, it's not the same sample, but similar type of sample. So we could easily have encountered areas of fibrin precipitating like this in the sample, but at this magnification and with this type of dark field system, it's simply not visible.
So you're missing a lot of the information, the vital information.
Absolutely, there's so much information that you're missing here that we simply just don't know, because you're not able to actually see what you really should be able to see. So the magnification is not what it should be. So the patterns that we usually look for around the thrombocytes, we're not really able to see those at all. And then all those smaller, fainter patterns between the cells that relate to pleomorphic patterns, we won't be able to see with this type of setup.
Okay,
yeah, so
thank you.
It really just affects your you know, your entire practice. So people try to sort of get started with live blood analysis and you know, don't actually get to use it to its full potential, and then, you know, end up looking for something else because you're not really able to use the tool because you don't really have the necessary equipment.
They're not really able to help people then.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So there's information in the sample that they're not able to actually get to, and you know, they're missing the boat completely with regards to their clients. Right, so this is also just another example. So these images from these non-live blood analysis microscopes are just examples from what some of our attendees in the past have sent in. So just to compare, you know, what we should be able to see in a sample and what some of these microscopes are actually producing. And these microscopes are, you know, microscopes that were sold as live blood analysis dark field microscopes, but we can see the, you know, the difference there quite clearly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just looking at the white blood cell there, for example, Elizabeth, you know, the white blood cell right at the center there is a granular site. It looks like it might be an eosinophil. We have a white blood cell, also a granular site, most likely a neutrophil in the other image. And just compare the brightness. That's, you know, that's already a very strong indicator of what's lacking in this other system.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, so also just a comparison there, and these images haven't been adjusted or edited in any way. That's actually what was sent in. So I think also an issue with the camera being used as well, which is also something to actually look at when looking at a microscope. The type of camera is quite important as well. There are some specifications that one really needs to pay attention to, not just the resolution. A lot of people look for, you know, the highest resolution camera that they can find, thinking that that would be the best option. But with digital cameras, as the resolution increases, the frame rate tends to go down. So often these 18 megapixel cameras have a 2 frame per second frame rate, or you know, something along those lines. So really not practical to use in a live blood type of environment where you have, you know, movement going on the screen all the time. What often happens then is that you end up having to adjust the resolution on the camera to a much lower resolution so that you actually get a smooth video, you know, with a high enough frame rate.
So the camera is also very important, as well as the magnification.
Yeah, absolutely. Magnification really important, and the camera as well. Not, as I said, you know, not just the resolution, but also the frame rate, and then also, you know, whether it's actually built for microscopy in the first place. Some microscopes come with just basic USB cameras that are not built specifically for microscopy, and then you end up with spots on the viewing field in bright field as a result of that, you know, because of imperfections in the, you know, camera sensor. But even microscope cameras specifically built for microscopes also need to be checked because of the different lighting conditions in bright field versus dark field. The exposure levels, you know, need to change quite drastically to produce a good quality image. So that's also important to check whether the camera would be able to handle that.
Right.
All right, and these are just some, well, I think we only have 1 or 2 images left, just some really nice images of what we're actually able to get with a good dark field system. And this is now using the 100 times objective. So the microscopes that we supply will allow you to actually use the microscope with the 40 times objective for most of the analysis, most of the live blood analysis. There's a sufficient level of magnification on the viewing screen using the 40 times objective for you to actually do the complete live blood analysis. then the system is also equipped with a 100 times objective, which is quite specialized, but then using the 100 times objective, we're able to get this type of magnification on the screen. So this is about a 4,000 times magnification. And the 100 times objective is quite a specialized objective. It has a built-in iris diaphragm that allows you to control or regulate the amount of light going through the objective, allowing you then to get a very high degree of clarity in images as well. So this actually is these are red blood cells, and then these are pleomorphic patterns. These are pleomorphic bacteria basically forming around the thrombocytes here. So very, very high level of magnification here, and certainly something that won't be possible with a basic non-suitable dark field system. All right, also with the 100 times magnification, 100 times objective here, so 4,000 times magnification on the screen. This is a monocyte, and we can see these dendritic growths, these extensions coming off the white blood cell here as well. So also just really, really nice to have this level of magnification, especially when looking at pleomorphic patterns and various growth forms. It's quite useful to be able to get up to this level of magnification, which at this point is really at the limit of what we're able to do with an optical microscope. Right, so that brings us to the end. Are there any other questions at all, Elizabeth?
Any questions, please put them in the questions box. And thank you very much for that. That was very, very interesting. And we hope that this has answered some of your questions and made it clear what to look out for when buying your microscope. And we hope that this will be helpful to you all. And we can't tell you just how important it is to get the right microscope, and how important it is to your live and dry blood analysis. There really aren't any shortcuts. So we are currently offering free shipping on our microscopes, and this is the link here. I'll be sending you a recording of this webinar, and I'll also put the link in there. So you'll find our recommended microscopes there, as well as our microscope brochure and the specs needed for the microscopes and all the information about our recommended microscopes. We are offering free international shipping by courier on all microscopes at the moment. So if you are considering buying one, then this may be a good time. And also, we offer an entry-level microscope system, as we did say, at a very reduced price for attendees on a budget. So it has everything you needed to practice live blood analysis now, and the camera can be upgraded at a later date. So let us also know if you'd like information about that by emailing us at info@livebloodonline.com. So as I say, we'll be sending out a recording. We'll be sending these links on the email address. So you'll have all the information there. So we don't seem to have any more questions. So anything else to add to that, Dr. Ocker?
I think just a common question that we often get is in terms of warranty. So the microscopes do have a 2-year warranty as well, which is also actually unusual, because most microscope suppliers just supply a 1-year warranty, but because of the build quality of these systems, we usually include a 2-year warranty.
Okay, marvelous. So thank you all very much for joining us, and we hope this has been useful. So it's goodbye from me, and thank you. Goodbye, Dr. Ocker.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Ciao.